Democrats divided. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi meets with members as calls grow louder to impeach the president. Focus on Syria. The State Department is investigating a possible chemical attack and whether President Assad is involved. Christian persecution. The United Kingdom is looking into global attacks on the faithful. We'll talk to the British ambassador to the Holy See. And calling China. Pope Francis has a message for Catholics in the communist country. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, May 22nd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A blow-up today at the White House as Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi accused President Donald Trump of a cover-up. The White House has defied congressional subpoenas regarding the Russia probe, and now the president says he will not work with Democrats until the investigation into his 2016 campaign stops. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump stormed out of a planned meeting here with top Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. They were all scheduled to discuss how to fix and pay for new U.S. infrastructure, but the framework they had previously built up soon came toppling down.
A follow-up meeting to discuss using trillions of dollars to repair U.S. roads and bridges turned into a head-on collision between the president and Democrats.
Get these phony investigations over with.
The president sharing what he said to Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
I want to do infrastructure. I want to do it more than you want to do it. I'd be really good at that. That's what I do. But you know what? You can't do it under these circumstances.
The president furious after Speaker Pelosi had said this before heading over for the White House meeting.
And we believe that the president of the United States is engaged in a cover-up.
I don't do cover-ups.
The president calling himself the most transparent president in history, with signs and stats showing time and money spent on special counsel Robert Mueller's concluded Russia investigation. The president says it cleared his name.
No collusion, no obstruction.
But Mueller's report still leaves questions about obstruction of justice, and President Trump continues his executive effort to defy congressional subpoenas and keep former White House staff from testifying on Capitol Hill.
To watch what happened in the White House would make your jaw drop.
Senator Schumer says the president is making excuses for not having a plan to pay for an infrastructure bill.
Hello? There were investigations going on 3 weeks ago when we met. And he still met with us. But now that he was forced to actually say how he'd pay for it, he had to run away.
Now, the reality is there are differences among both parties over infrastructure, and a compromise will be difficult. Now, after the smoke cleared here, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she prays for the president. He responded with a thank you on Twitter and said, "I know you truly mean it." Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. The theatrics seem to continue. Thank you. The day was already tense before the White House blow-up. Democrats in the House huddled amid calls for impeachment. The cries grew louder yesterday after the president blocked his former White House lawyer from testifying. But Speaker Pelosi has warned impeachment could backfire. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Roughly 24 Democrats say it's time for the House to launch an impeachment investigation. They say that could help with the ongoing legal battles over the already launched investigations. Now, that means most Democrats and Speaker Pelosi are in the wait-and-see camp. Let the current investigations, let those court battles play out.
I think this is an ongoing conversation.
Democrats debate, should they now officially start an impeachment investigation?
The vast majority would, in fact, support impeachment, just not now.
New flare-ups over an empty chair, reserved yesterday for former White House counsel Don McGahn, the Mueller report's most cited witness.
Let me be clear. This committee will hear Mr. McGahn's testimony, even if we have to go to court to secure it.
The president has pledged to fight every subpoena.
We have the constitutional duty not just a prerogative, constitutional duty to perform oversight responsibilities over the executive branch. And President Trump is not going to stop us from doing that.
I think it's important for us to follow the facts and get to the truth. And again, there's lots of evidence of a cover-up happening.
But President Trump tweets, "Everybody, including me, thought that when the $40 million Mueller report was released with no collusion and no obstruction of a crime caused by others, that was the end. But no, the Democrats want to keep it going in an effort to help them in 2020. Bad for the country." Republican Senator Lindsey Graham echoes the president.
I disagree with what the House is doing. I thought Mueller was the final word, but we all still have to govern the country. We need roads and bridges, and I can understand how the president feels like it's never enough.
Democratic Senator Tom Carper also driving the focus back to infrastructure.
And hopefully, cooler heads will prevail and we'll get serious about this.
Speaker Pelosi this afternoon repeated that she thinks President Trump is engaged in a cover-up. She said that could be an impeachable offense. She cited the articles of impeachment against President Richard Nixon. One of those was ignoring the subpoenas of Congress. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Tough questions on Capitol Hill for a judicial nominee who once argued a case against a Catholic farmer. Republican Senator Josh Hawley pressed federal judicial nominee Michael Bogren.
I am shocked by the statements that I read in your briefs. I am shocked by this kind of language. I'm particularly shocked by it in light of the Supreme Court's clear teaching that this kind of animus and these kind of hateful comparisons are out of step with the protections of our law and are not permissible.
President Trump nominated Michael Bogren to a federal court in Michigan. He defended the city of East Lansing when it tried to stop a Catholic farmer from selling at its farmers market because of the farmer's traditional views on marriage. The United States warns Syria may have started using chemical weapons again in their fight against rebel groups. State Department officials say if it's true, the U.S. and its allies will respond quickly and appropriately. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Officials here are trying to determine whether the country's president, Bashar Assad, may have ordered a chlorine attack Sunday on rebels in the northwest part of the country. The violence in the region has escalated in the past 2 months, leaving innocent Syrians without food, water, or a place to live. Hassan, a 9-year-old Syrian boy, gets teary-eyed describing how happy he was at school with his friends before a bomb hit his town several weeks ago and forced his family to flee. So far this month, tens of thousands of families, including Hassan's, have fled to villages and towns close to Syria's border with Turkey. In some areas, overcrowded camp populations have quadrupled. The Syrians are fleeing Idlib, a province in the northwest part of the country. The region has seen an increase in violence between Syrian government forces and rebels. Humanitarian groups say schools, hospitals, and other medical facilities have been attacked.
This area is home to millions of civilians, and in the midst of that, there are also armed groups. So the lack of distinction between military targets and civilian facilities is a clear violation of international humanitarian law.
Now, the situation may be getting worse, with allegations Syrian President Bashar al-Assad ordered a chemical weapon attack near Idlib's border. If he did, it would violate a ceasefire agreement negotiated by Russia, who supports Assad, and Turkey last year. The Trump administration has twice bombed Syria over Assad's alleged use of chemical weapons, once in April 2017 and again 1 year later. The Syrian ambassador to the United Nations is placing the blame on the rebels, calling them terrorist organizations that use hundreds of thousands of civilians as human shields. He says they're the ones using schools and hospitals as a place to stage attacks. State Department officials have accused Russia and the Syrian president of, quote, continuing a disinformation campaign aimed at blaming others for chemical weapons attacks. So far, there's been no official statement from the Syrian government, and they've not said whether they used a chemical weapon. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. At least 6 people are dead following riots in Indonesia over the results of last month's presidential election. The clashes occurred in Jakarta between police and supporters of the losing candidate. President Joko Widodo won the vote yesterday, and the loser will challenge him in court, citing massive fraud. A 77-year-old nun who taught underprivileged girls in Central African Republic has been killed. Local media report she was decapitated in the village of Nola. Pope Francis led thousands of people in prayer for her at the Vatican today. She hailed from a diocese in southern France. No motive has been given for the attack. And Pope Francis says Friday's Feast of Our Lady, help of Christians, should be used to pray for Catholics in China.
Cari fedeli in Cina, la nostra Mamma del Cielo vi aiuti tutti ad essere testimoni di carità e di fraternità.
At his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father also called the faithful in the communist country to come together in communion. Last year, the Holy See and Beijing reached a provisional agreement over the appointment of bishops. There are roughly 12 million Catholics in China. A preliminary report published by the United Kingdom on the persecution of Christians paints a grim global picture. The final study, which was commissioned by UK Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, is expected this summer. Sally Axworthy is the British ambassador to the Holy See. She joins us from Rome. Welcome back to our broadcast, Sally.
Thank you, Lauren.
There are prominent groups like Open Doors, Pew Research Center, and other governments like the U.S. State Department that issue annual reports detailing the extent of Christian persecution around the globe. And now the UK has decided to take a look at the issue. Why now?
So we have always defended the right to freedom of religion or belief. But I think this review was commissioned by our Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, because of the incidences of persecution of Christians, and in particular, I can't speak for him, but I imagine prompted by what has been going on in the Middle East, in particular in Iraq and Syria. So he decided to take an in-depth look at our track record on defending Christians who are persecuted, and to ask the question about whether we could do better.
How is the Vatican working with you?
But the Vatican, has been involved in this because one of the collaborators on the report, Sir Charles Hoare, came here and he talked to various people in the Vatican community, in the Congregation for Oriental Churches, for example, and the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, because they're obviously experts on this issue. So in a way, the Vatican has contributed to the report, and we expect to see some of the Vatican's thoughts coming out in the second part.
And I understand you're talking about ways to get at the base of the problem.
Our embassy, the British Embassy to the Holy See, has done quite a lot of work with the Vatican on some of perhaps the underlying causes of persecution of people for their religious beliefs. And in particular with the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, we did a conference on, we called it Tackling Violence Committed in the Name of Religion, which Cardinal Toran, before he passed away, worked with us on, and in fact which the Pope gave us an audience for that. And the idea was to look at the kind of beliefs that promote intolerance, that promote people to attack those who are different to them or those who hold other beliefs. And it was a dialogue between Christian and Muslim scholars. And we believe that this can make a contribution to ending persecution or to helping us to live together more peacefully.
Thank you so much. And I know it's quite windy up on that rooftop, so thank you so much for joining us, Sally Axworthy, British Ambassador to the Holy See.
You're very welcome.
Coming up, what presidential candidate Joe Biden is saying about recent pro-life legislation. Presidential candidate Joe Biden says he would support Congress putting abortion rights into federal law if necessary. The former vice president calls recent pro-life legislation among several states pernicious and wrong. Biden is a practicing Catholic. Earlier in his career, he took a middle-of-the-road approach to the fight for the unborn. And that legislation that former Vice President Biden referenced, restricting abortion in states across the country, has deepened the ideological divide between Republicans and Democrats. Even pro-life advocates wonder if the legislation can withstand legal challenges. Joining me now is Kristen Day, Executive Director of Democrats for Life of America. Kristen, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Other Democratic presidential candidates, like Biden, have used the passage of Alabama's total near ban of abortion to say that pro-lifers and Republicans are out of touch with the American public. What are you hearing from pro-life Democrats?
Well, I find it interesting that they're focusing on Alabama and not the other states.
New York, is that what you're saying, or the heartbeat bills?
Yes,
Sorry.
yeah, they're only focusing on Alabama and not states like New Mexico, who pro-life Democrats joined to defeat an extremism bill. And in Rhode Island, well, pro-life Democrats stopped an abortion extremism bill. So the number of pro-life bills that are passing around the country are passing with Democrat support for the most part. And they're focusing on Alabama only because, you know, it is a little more extreme than other bills, but it also, the Senate did not have a single Democrat support it, mainly because there are only about 5 Democrats in the Senate.
Did Joe Biden miss an opportunity here? He
He sure did. I mean, what a shame that he changed and flip-flopped on the Hyde Amendment, because pro-life Democrats are looking for someone to just reach out a hand and say, you're welcome in the party and please stay and vote Democrat. And up till now, nobody has done that. And
Do they care? I mean, is it on their radar? Do they care if they get pro-life Democrats support?
I think they're really only hearing from one side of the issue. So we did send every congressional or every presidential candidate a questionnaire, just basically saying, hey, do you believe in the big tent? Would you welcome us in?
And what'd they say?
We haven't heard back from any of them yet. So we're looking for opportunities to push that issue a little bit more. And
when I covered the 2016 election, the Democratic platform at the convention was on abortion the most extreme it has ever been. And I'm wondering what we're going to see this year.
But I don't know how it can get more extreme. Well, they could take away the support for pregnant women that we really pushed to include. But the support for pregnant women, even in that, was sort of an afterthought. It had this whole litany of support for abortion, and then, oh yeah, and then we support pregnant women too. So it could go more extreme by removing the support for pregnant women.
According to Gallup polls last year, and this is historically true since they've been polling for this since about 1976, that 50% of Americans thought abortion should be legal only under certain circumstances. Could what some are being calling this extreme strategy in Alabama backfire?
Well, I think the extreme strategy could backfire on both sides. So the extreme strategy by the Democrats backfired when they passed that in New York, because, you know, the number of people identifying as pro-life shot up. And I think Democrats are missing a huge opportunity right now to return to a position of safe, legal, and rare. Because
Hello, Bill Clinton.
Hello, yes, yeah, you know, Bill Clinton, and that's a position that pro-lifers and pro-choice people can agree on. You know, let's move back to safe, legal, and rare, and Democrats would have a better opportunity of winning.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kristen Day, Executive Director of Democrats for Life for America. America.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Up next, new developments in West Virginia's investigation into clergy abuse. And we talk to a group fighting California's attempt to overhaul teaching of sexuality and gender in public schools. Franciscan University of Steubenville announces its new president. Father David Pivonka graduated from the school in 1989, making him the first alumnus to lead the Catholic school. He replaces Father Sean Sheridan, who resigned last month. Father Sheridan faced questions over his handling of sexual harassment cases. West Virginia's Attorney General says the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston concealed allegations of sexual abuse of a student at a Catholic school.
I call on the Catholic Church today to release the Bishop Bransfield report. The public deserves to know what is in that information.
Attorney General Patrick Morrissey, a Catholic, announced the new allegations against the diocese and former Bishop Michael Bransfield. He says they covered up criminal behavior of priests related to the sexual abuse of children. In a statement, the diocese says they reject the allegations. The state of California has overhauled its sex education guidance for public school teachers. It's a move that has outraged parents who argue children are being exposed to ideas about gender and sexuality that should be taught at home. Earlier this month, concerned parents joined advocates at the state capitol to protest the proposals that include encouraging talking about gender identity with kindergartners and giving relationship advice to teenagers who identify as LGBT. Joining me now is Jonathan Keller, President and CEO of the California Family Council, which opposes the new guidelines. Jonathan, welcome to our broadcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
These guidelines don't require teachers to teach about sex, but rather provide guidance about how to address issues related to gender identification, sexual orientation, sexual relations. Why did the Department of Education say this was needed?
You know, I think it's an example, sadly, of the state of California really going farther and faster than parents certainly want to see things happen. We're seeing parents wanting to maintain control over their kids' educational guidelines, and the state of California is instead mandating a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach for every district.
Well, do you believe, let's back up here, do you believe that there is a place in public schools for any type of discussion on sexual issues?
Oh, absolutely. I think the concern is that this is not comprehensive sex ed. It's not the birds and the bees that we've known about in the past. It's comprehensive sexuality education. It's introducing topics to children, again, as young as 5 and 6 years old, relating to gender identity, for example. And the idea that you would put the choice of whether or not biology and gender are connected into the hands and the minds of a 5 or 6 year old, that just seems really extreme.
The Board of Education, not the Department of Education, as I said earlier, in other words, is getting in people's business, and they don't like it, but many do. So tell me where does it, what's the percentage? Are there more people who don't or more people who do? Obviously it passed, right?
It did. Well, this is actually a difficulty that we see in the state of California on so many different issues. Because the state is so large, 40 million people, you can have a bare majority of people in the state that approve of this type of education, but that still leaves millions of parents, millions of children that are being forced to either accept wholesale a type of sexuality education they vehemently disagree with, they object to for religious reasons, or they have to try to find some other alternative schooling method. And the fact that the state tells single moms, for example, I'm sorry, you may not have the option to homeschool, you may not have the ability to afford to put your child in parochial school, take it or leave it. That just seems, again, to be unfair and cruel to these parents.
Is it possible to change this?
I think it still is, and the fact that the school actually did walk back some of the books that had been introduced. There was 5 books that were removed from the curriculum after parent protest.
And what were they about? Transgender?
They were actually about not appropriate for the
television
broadcast.
Audiences, okay.
Very
well, then
graphic.
I don't think they're appropriate for school children, but all right.
Basically, yes. Very graphic education of sexuality, again, as young as first grade.
First grade?
First grade. And
so those books are no longer?
They were not. They were removed as a recommended resource. They are not banned. They are still allowed to be read. But the fact that the district, or that as you said, the board actually pulled these books out, I think goes to show that even they were becoming aware of the criticism. So our hope is that parents would continue to respectfully engage, participate in the civic process, and also that parishes and other schools around the state would really provide a haven to these parents that are looking to leave some of these environments.
Jonathan Keller, President and CEO of the California Family Council, which opposes these guidelines. Jonathan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.